नमस्कार, आप देख रहे हैं स्टडी आईक्यू। मैं हूं दिव्यांशी श्रीवास्तवा और आज हमारे साथ एक बेहद ही खास मेहमान जुड़े हैं। पूर्व आईएएस ऑफिसर डॉक्टर ए विद्यासागर, रिटायर्ड एज एडिशनल चीफ सेक्रेटरी गवर्नमेंट ऑफ आंध्र प्रदेश। बहुत बहुत स्वागत है सर आपका स्टडी आईक्यू पे।
थैंक यू।
सर, हमें बहुत खुशी है कि आज हमारे साथ आप इस इंटरव्यू सेशन में जुड़े हैं। हम बात करेंगे, हम चर्चा करेंगे इंडियन ब्यूरोक्रेसी के बारे में, स्टेट ऑफ इंडियन एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन चैलेंजेस और आपकी बेहद डायनामिक करियर के बारे में।
Thank you. I'm very happy to join this meeting, but sorry, I'm unable to speak to you in Hindi. If you permit me, I'll speak in English.
सबसे पहले इस शुरुआत इसी से करते हैं कि नाउ यू आर रिटायर्ड एज एडिशनल चीफ सेक्रेटरी। व्हेन यू लुक बैक टू योर करियर, हाउ इज द फीलिंग? इज इट द फीलिंग ऑफ satisfaction, gratification?
Yes, it's satisfying and gratifying also, because basically I worked in the fields of my choice and never really look for the so-called coveted postings or choice postings or prestigious postings. I was always interested in the community welfare, and I wanted to work for the communities. Mostly it is starting with women, these all the marginalized communities. Perhaps I'm the only one who worked as principal secretary, even special chief secretary of various communities. Like in Andhra Pradesh, you had individual departments for each section of these people. Women and child welfare is one, and social welfare is another, backward class welfare is another, tribal welfare is another, minority welfare is another. Like that, for each section, there is a separate department. Except women and child welfare, I worked in all the departments as either commissioner or principal secretary, out of my choice.
So
that's why it's satisfying.
So we could say that you actually have fulfilled what civil services is actually all about.
Yes.
I want you to take back to the times of your preparation about your journey of civil services. So how were you introduced to the idea of civil services?
It's really interesting. I heard about civil services as a kid, but then not in the name of civil services. I knew there is one service called IAS as a kid in studying in second class. But then after that, I never tried or never prepared myself for this kind of civil services. But then that is basically because I'm interested in this academics. So I finished my that master's in SV University, Venkateswara University in Tirupati, Andhra Pradesh. Then I went to JNU for my MPhil PhD. So while doing this MPhil PhD, I got a job in the university as a lecturer. So I was quite happy. But then one fine morning, my mother asked me, okay, in our family, we have all teachers and lecturers and all that. Why don't you try for this civil services? So perhaps this is the one which made me think, okay, why not? So I gave myself a kind of 6 months time to prepare. While preparing for the classes, because after all, immediately in the very next year, I got into this lecturer job. So as a fresher, I had to teach my own juniors MA Economics, Developmental Economics, MA classes. So while doing that, every evening I used to prepare for some 3 hours for civil services. So within 3 months, I got that kind of a confidence. Yes, I'll be able to do it. Unfortunately, I got into IPS in the first attempt itself. So since I could get into IPS in the first attempt, then I realized if I push little further, I should be in IPS. So that is the reason why I easily gave up IPS. In IPS, I got my own home quarter of Andhra Pradesh. So all my batchmates were they were really shocked to see leaving IPS that to have after getting my home quarter. But anyway, it's my mother who reminded me or motivated me, or even it's a kind of a motherly, affectionate suggestion that why don't you do this? That is basically because as teachers, both the parents are teachers, so they must have seen the collector visiting the school quite some time back. And as teachers, they must have kind of felt really great to see their son as a collector visiting these villages or even visiting schools, visiting various works and all that. So I have given a try, and then fortunately, in the first round itself, I could get the conference because of IPS. Then in the second round, I got it by IPS.
There is definitely so much to learn from Sir's journey, Sir's experience. एक बहुत ही important fact जो हमें यहाँ पे पता चलता है, confidence. Sir easily got IPS into first attempt, but he was so sure about getting into IAS that he left IPS. So such an inspiration, sir, you are.
It so happened, but actually it's quite a risky kind of decision, and nobody would support me. But then that was the level of confidence at that point of time.
Sir, जैसे आपने बताया कि जब first attempt में you got IPS, you left it because you were so sure of getting into IAS. Can you still recall the moment when you were selected as IAS?
When we got the results, exactly, I was participating in a trekking program in Himalayas, along with my friends and all that. And many of them, they didn't know that I have given the exam. So all of them were really surprised to find my name, and they immediately calculated what service would I get. So since they knew me earlier, that once I left IPS and then temporarily in a different service like Defense Account Service, and they found my name in the likely list of IAS, they were quite happy. It was really thrilling.
सर जैसे आपने बताया कि IAS बनना ही आपका सपना था, what must be the right motivation to come into these services?
Actually, the very name is service. You should have service in mind. The very name says civil service. So your motive always should be to serve the people as far as possible. Because after all, in our society, how many people could get educated? And how many people could really complete post-graduation? And even very few people could take a kind of a competitive exam. When you are able to clear all these levels, your motive should be to serve your people to the best of your ability. I don't think any other motive is worth not mentioning, saying that people can enter the service for something else also. No, it should be for serving the people alone.
Right from the starting of your career till your retirement, any moment that you want to relive again?
Actually, there are two such moments. I started as a project officer of a project. It's more or less like a district magistrate within the district. That's called Project Officer Integrated Tribal Development Agency. So there, I could see things, plan, and execute, review, revise, again, go back to the table and then make revisions, improve the implementation and execution of the program. There, I used to meet people with abject poverty, and also people with a lot of hopes on governmental institutions, and having that kind of a faith that government would deliver.
So that is one moment or one experience where I would like to go back to those interior areas sometimes. So I was working in a district called Khammam. So that is right now it is called Bhadrachalam. Bhadrachalam area. Bhadrachalam is famous for Ram temple, Sri Ram's temple. And then in Bhadrachalam, we have this an office called Integrated Tribal Development Agency. So in this Integrated Tribal Development Agency, at the immediately after your training, that is with just 2 years of your experience in the field as sub-collector, that is SDM. In North, it is called SDM, but in southern states, we call it as sub-collector. So with just 2 years of experience going into the district and having an experience of seeing a problem and then plan for it, execute it, review it. If it's not satisfactory, revise it, then go back to the people, take their suggestions, implement it. So that way, that used to give me kind of a full, freedom to do what I wanted and what people wanted. So that is the one. Given a chance again, I would like to go back to those interior villages. In the tribal area, there was something like 1,209 tribal villages. Out of these 1,209, I could visit 1,150 villages. Every day I was out. And starting in the morning at 6:30, 7 o'clock, traveling right into the jungles and returning sometime in the evening at 7:30, having dinner, clearing files. Then again in the morning, the same way. But though it was tiring, but it was quite relaxing also. Physically tiring, but mentally quite relaxing because you are going to the people, going in interior areas where people are having that kind of a faith in you. And you are also deriving, actually, you get the first-hand knowledge about how people live. Because we, living in the cities, we don't really know what the real life is. So if you go into the interior areas, you will know firsthand how difficult it is for an average Indian to live. And an average Indian to live with dignity. And an average Indian to live with that kind of sufficient resources. So if you are able to meet or fulfill all these three things in the interior areas also, that used to make us feel that, yes, at least I could do my bit. And that is one. Second experience was, I was the secretary of this residential school society. My idea was that every child should get education. But unfortunately, government systems and all our institutions are not able to cover even 65%. Even out of the 65% also, people who could get quality education may not be more than 20%. But my idea was that why not all these 100% children get quality education? So we used to make plans, used to visit villages and find out what can be done. But practically, it used to be very difficult to create that kind of an infrastructure and even to visit the same place again. This is another experience, if given a chance. I would like to go through the whole process.
They were really a treat to listen, and I'm sure you're giving all the right reasons to the aspirants to join civil services. So, what has been the most challenging task in your career?
Challenging task. Actually, I told you about this education thing. Since I like academics, my idea is that extend these education facilities to as many children as possible. And also giving quality education. So that as the secretary of that residential school society, the number of schools we could run were very limited, whereas the children who used to attend for these qualifying exams, they used to be in thousands. When I saw them going back to their own village schools, I used to feel sad. So that was really, really challenging thing of expanding the resources and admitting as many children as possible in the residential schools, where you can give them not only good facilities, but good education, where the teachers stay with them. Teachers are available all the time. That is, some elders available with the children all the time. And clearing their doubts or giving them that kind of a confidence. Yes, if a student studies well, he could go any form. So that is one experience, and that was really challenging. Even now, that is the same problem we are facing in the country. Not even 25% people are able to get quality education. The rest of the people having education, kind of a so-so kind of education.
Since you described how you have worked in the tribal areas during the initial stage of your service, how feasible and accommodative are the demands of Jal, Jungle, Jameen by tribals?
Actually, these are not demands. They are basically basic needs of those people who are living there. Jal, Jameen, Jungle. They are these tribal communities are integral part of these forests. Tribals and forests were there before the government department of forest came into existence. You must remember, they were there for thousands of years. They are the people who are actually protecting the forests because they realize the value of the forests, value of land, value of water thousands of years back. Now we want to tell them how to protect the forest. Unfortunately, that is giving us an impression that they are demanding for them. But these three are the basic things for them to live with dignity as equal citizens of this country. They're not just demanding as if somebody is taking away. They are asking for what they need. These are basic things.
So, from your experience, if you can tell us what is stopping the tribals from joining the mainstream, and what is going to be the role of administration in convincing them?
Nothing is stopping tribals to join the mainstream. Mainstream is not allowing them to join. Basically, the basic problem, our society is an unequal society. And these days, because of the technology, everybody knows what is happening around. But fortunately, many people do not have the access to get in the basic facilities. So naturally, they are not able to. It's not the question of not joining. They don't have the access. And if they don't have the basic needs fulfilled, where is the question of those people taking a decision on that, saying that whether joining or not joining? They will be really happy to be like you and me. They never refused. They don't want to stay aloof or alone, or they don't want to be on their own. They want to be like you and me.
I'm sure, sir.
Given an opportunity.
I'm sure, sir, your words are going to develop a thought process for inclusion of the tribals in the mainstream, and that is everyone's responsibility.
Yes, we must, because nearly 75% of people are under various categories. They are facing and suffering from various inequalities, various discriminations, and 50% of women. Most of them, even now, they don't get treated as equals. They don't get treated as human beings. And nearly another 22% of Dalits. Many Dalits in the villages, they still feel insecure. And the people in the tribal areas, they feel that they are not part of, or they can't afford what we treat as something normal. So these are the people who really make up 70% of this country. So unless we make all these people get these basic things and have that kind of hope that we should be able to live with dignity. So here, actually, since various sections of people are not able to access the basic needs, the first priority of all the civil servants to reach out to these people who are living in the interior areas. Actually, even now, there are many people who get the basic drinking water, proper shelter, and there are many villages without power supply, and there are many villages without the basic things. So unless we make all these people get these basic things, we cannot expect them to feel confident or have faith in the system. So that's why fortunately, in the civil services, the very first posting as sub-collector or the assistant commissioner or the SDM, generally the work will be in the rural areas only. But after these 2 years, many people go back to the cities and they may not come back to the entire service to know what exactly is happening in the rural areas, interior areas. I feel that every civil servant should have that exposure to these rural areas, interior areas, and problem areas, especially the problems of the marginalized communities. This is what I feel.
Definitely, sir. The system needs to reach out to these people, and here the role of civil services is instrumental. So, moving
Yes.
forward, so you have retired as additional chief secretary. It
Yes.
is often considered from a common perspective that politicians and bureaucrats are not always on the same page. What has been your experience of managing the political pressure along with welfare of the state?
Actually, this political pressure is something like kind of an inevitable thing. Because after all, these two people will have to work together. But in the process, there are many certainly there would be pressure, but then it depends on these two individuals also. Depending on the temperament of the both the individuals, they may be able to come to some common understanding of solving a problem. But if that kind of common understanding comes only when you have personal respect for the other person. Unfortunately, I think over a period of time, we are losing that kind of a personal respect for the other person. Many people would like to dominate or impose their ideas and all the time tell the people what should be done. So coming to your politician, the bureaucrat, politician, he wants to get things done quickly, whether it is right or wrong. But whereas it is a civil servant who has to weigh the pros and cons. So at that point of time, if the politician has the respect for the civil servant, he would listen. Otherwise, what is going to happen is, in most of the cases, it is the civil servant who loses and the politician prevails. But in my case, there was an experience of a very senior politician when I was district magistrate. We got funds for this drought management. There was a serious drought in the district. So we prepared a plan based on the local conditions, ground realities. When we got the funds, this senior politician insisted that he should get more. I said, it is just not possible because everybody knows what is the condition in each segment, that is each assembly segment. And other MLAs also, if they keep asking me that they need more, what can I do? If at all you feel that you deserve more or you should get more, you have to go back to the government and ask for more funds rather than insisting that I should give you more money when the money is already allotted. So there, unfortunately, in my case, since he was a senior politician, he got me shifted. Yeah, actually, 2 months before, he was the one who was praising me to the skies. That here is an officer who is quite fair and having that kind of a people's orientation and all that. And all the MLAs also used to say the same thing. But within 2 months, when his own personal interest came in, all those good qualities in me of no value. And similarly, there was another instance. This time it was a chief minister. After that, he went as law minister in Government of India. So there, as additional collector, I found that these women SC are not being given these dealership for the ration shops. I realized that some of these dominant communities are taking away all the dealerships in the villages. So I thought I should do something about it. So I reinstated some of these women and SCs and some physically handicapped. So this has really impacted the central minister, who was previously chief minister of the state. He prevailed on the CM. He got me shifted. Of course, he was treated as a kind of a gentleman. In Telugu, what they say is Peddamanishi. That means really a gentleman, a statesman. But at that level, as a union minister also, he had his own compulsions. But as a civil servant, I felt I should do my duty after all when these people come to me with that kind of a faith and hope, when they're eligible and when they should be encouraged. Come what may, I should do this. I did it, but the result was I was shifted. That's why I have chosen 3 approaches. One is try to discuss wherever possible with the politician. If he agrees, it's okay. If he doesn't agree, approach 2 is write on the file what you want to write and leave it. Because after all, politician and the bureaucrat both are part of the system. So once you write, once you express your opinion, the next level man, that is the minister, or even the chief minister, they have their own prerogative to take their own decision and never used to question. I have expressed myself. If they took a decision which is completely or which is going completely against my view, I didn't bother. Because after all, they're also part of the system. They're also equally responsible. If something goes wrong, it is their problem, and it's not my problem. And then third thing was, since I personally like working for these communities, especially marginalized communities, generally the politicians in these departments, they have kind of a regard for the officers. So the personal regard used to make them feel that, yes, since he has taken a decision, means I think that decision must be right, that decision must be beneficial. Perhaps we are not able to immediately appreciate it. So that way, following these three approaches, somehow I managed. But generally, what we observe is whenever you clash with a politician, if he is a kind of a powerful man from a socially dominant community, it is his voice which reaches the topmost before the bureaucrat. And ultimately, it is the bureaucrat who gets shit. So that way, though there were some problems, but then it is inevitable. In my case, I don't think it was such a kind of a bad experience. I said, it's fine. After all, they're also part of the system. That's what I suggest to all the civil servants. Do your bit. That there used to be a kind of an ad. Do your bit, keep the union fit. Do your bit, and then leave it. Instead of insisting that you are right and the other person is wrong, or you are fair and other person is unfair. Instead, if he is particular, let him take the decision. Ultimately, he will be responsible. So we should not be, as civil servants, we should not be so insistent on this. It's of no use. And if you keep arguing continuously, also what happens is you will not be able to work. After all, we have to work for some time to produce some results. So that's why it's always better to try to have a kind of some common minimum ground with the politician. If it is not possible, express your opinion and then leave it at that. Third one, choose an area where the politicians' interference is really not that great. These are the three approaches which made my experience in the civil services as pleasant as possible.
I'm sure, sir, this must be accepted as a fact that politicians and bureaucrats both are part of the system and they have to act together for a better good. And so, from your
Yes.
experiences that you have cited, we could easily call you people's officer.
Actually, because I used to work with really with the communities all the time. And I used to enjoy going to the villages, sleeping there, and then getting up early in the morning and talking to them and joining their work and observing them, what they do, so that we can learn the real life of the people. So that way, I think they used to call me people's officer, yes.
So, moving forward to the next question, it's a little personal question. Your wife, K. Ratna Prabha ma'am, she has retired as Chief Secretary to Government of Karnataka. So, both of you were IAS officers managing a lot of responsibilities. How did you both manage work-life balance?
We knew at the time of marriage that both of us are at equal level, having equal responsibilities, and there is no possibility of both of us living together. Accepting that fact. Actually, when we got married, I was in a district called Nizamabad in Telangana. My wife, Ratnaprabha, was in Chikmagalur. The distance between these two places was 1,000 kilometers. Knowing fully well, even when my collector was a lady collector, she discouraged me because her husband is also an IAS officer. They were batchmates. She discouraged me. See, you look at me. Sir is somewhere, there is her husband. And I am living here in Nizamabad, an interior area with two girl children, how difficult it is to meet. But then, when I discussed with my future wife, she said, we'll manage. She has given me that kind of a confidence. Then I said, yes. When she is saying that we'll manage, yes, we'll manage it. And that that confidence has that's basically because we like each other. The basic liking as two persons. So that liking made us to take a decision of, okay, let's face whatever it comes. Let's take things as they come instead of having that kind of a fear, or instead of thinking that everything will be difficult and all that. Okay, let's see. We have taken a decision, conscious decision, and after that, sometime she came to Andhra Pradesh on deputation. And even then, when she was on deputation in Andhra Pradesh as censor officer, I was working again 300 kilometers away as project officer. She came all the way from Karnataka on deputation, but I was 300 kilometers away in Bhadrachalam. So every weekend, since censor office is under control of the government of India, that information broadcasting, they have 5-day week. So she used to come with my small girl, my daughter, traveling by train, staying there for 2 days, going back to Hyderabad. And in most of the, wherever possible, we used to work in the neighboring districts, wherever possible. But otherwise, children used to be with the mother, and I used to travel. That way, since we have that kind of a basic understanding, accepting the fact that yes, we have to be away, and we should not make it an issue at all. So that way, we unfortunately almost for 10 years, she worked in Andhra Pradesh on deputation. During that time, all of us worked together. She was working as development commissioner for the export processing zone, and I was managing director of a cooperative corporation. And children were studying in the school. So those 10 years, we were together. 20-25 years, shuttling, shifting. So that way, we managed.
That's really so beautiful to know, sir, the way you both managed.
Yes. Because after all, once you accept a fact, you find a way. Instead of cribbing, or instead of expecting too much, or instead of blaming each other, it's always better to accept the fact. Because after all, when your wife is at equal, in fact, she is my senior. She was additional collector when I was a probation.
That's even more beautiful to know.
So that's why it is a basic liking for each other that made us to take a decision to take things as they come, instead of entertaining various doubts, or expecting some serious difficulties and all that. Because my own collector was giving me an example saying that it's difficult, but then we thought, okay, let it be. So we could manage. We were happy. We are happy, and no regrets.
And we wish that you both stay happy together forever.
We are, because after she has retired, she keeps traveling to Bangalore, but then most of the time, that too thanks to this COVID, and all of us are here almost for the last 8 to 10 months. She is also here.
So the days of your service must have been very hectic, with every day facing new challenges and dealing with a lot of people. Now, since you have retired, how you're spending your post-retirement days?
Even before retirement, what I was doing is recording whatever I saw, whatever I experienced. So that way, I'm continuing that. I want to do three things after my retirement. One is continue reading and writing, then going for horticulture activity, that is agriculture and horticulture activity. Third one, running an NGO. So all these three things keep me engaged even now. As in the service as an officer, I used to do these things partly or partially. But now I have decided that I should continue with these things. For example, the first one, the books which I wrote based on my own experiences, personal experiences. And the second thing, as project officer at that young age, and with just 2 years of experience, I could take up 3 lakh acres of horticulture projects. And today, all those tribals, they are reaping the benefits. They get a good crop of cashew, coconut, mango. When you, of course, when I retired as a additional chief secretary, I visited those places once again. So what all I did as project officer in the beginning of the service, by the time I was retiring, I could see the results and those people happy. Then I thought, okay, why shouldn't I have my own personal experience of horticulture? And then running another NGO, that is, I'm running an NGO in the name of my parents. And that NGO is basically for the environmental awareness and quality education and girl child's education, especially girl child education. And in our school, I have adopted my school, that is where I studied my up to 5th class. We try to upgrade into middle school and high school. Now it's a high school. And all the girls are the toppers in that girls' school now. Because I keep visiting my village every month. I keep talking to these students every 3 months. And just before their exam, I maybe go there, sit for 2-3 days. And interestingly, all the toppers for the last 4-5 years are girls from that high school. So these are the three things which keeps me engaged.
So this seems to be a full cycle of fulfillment, if we can say that precisely. So you've written a lot of books. How this passion developed?
Real experience. When you see people, when you see communities, and when you compare where we are, where those people are, can we do something about this? And can we really express, or can we bring their problems to the notice of the larger society? That's why the very first book was about the tribal communities recording their own experiences, recording their own solutions to their own problems. Unfortunately, most of the officers think they know everything, they should teach people, but it's totally wrong. Actually, we should learn from people, improvise upon it, and then take it back to the people, then make them partners in the developmental administration, so that they'll also feel that yes, they are part and parcel of a problem, and they could solve their own problems with their own efforts and the ability. So based on that experience, I've written short stories. And these short stories got a really very good review. And fortunately, that is got translated by NBT, that is the National Book Trust, into all Indian languages under Adan Pradhan program: Bengali, Kannada, uh, Tamil, and Odia. So they have translated. And after that, as I experienced seeing various communities of people and the real problems faced by the people, either youth or certain communities or some interior areas, the areas which we call as remote areas, they are not actually remote areas. They are actually rich areas. But unfortunately, we are not allowing people to work on those resources to better their lives. Instead, people from outside go there, they utilize those resources at the cost of the local. So in the process, what is happening is the areas are rich, people are poor. That applies to our country also. Our country is rich, but most of our people are poor. For the simple reason, we are still not allowing people to participate. Though we talk about participatory development and all that, we still not allow them. So when I face these problems, when I experience these problems, I used to record it. So each experience, like the problems with this in the interior remote areas, how people feel, like that psychological deficiencies or a kind of a diffidence they feel, a kind of hesitancy, how certain areas, certain communities are being neglected. So this is the subject matter of another book. When I came back to the city, I saw slums. The people who give us all the services, they build beautiful mansions, they create various facilities. Ultimately, they go back to live in the slums. In the slums, they may not be having the basic facilities. And after the globalization, what is happening is they are able to see how fast the world is changing, but they are not able to get the basics. So that made me to write another book. So whatever I saw as an officer, and I thought that I should express myself from their point of view. So that is the basic motivation to write these books.
Sure, sir, you're developing a thought process in the future aspirants, and they must be getting a lot of overview about how services is all about.
Yeah.
So we have got a lot of insights about your experiences, your journey, about your career. सर हम आपसे थोड़ा सा यूपीएससी सीएससी की जर्नी के बारे में गाइडेंस लेना चाहते हैं सभी एस्पिरेंट्स के लिए. अगर हम बात करें पहले की तो जो पैटर्न था एग्जामिनेशन का, इट हैज चेंज्ड ओवर द इयर्स. तो क्या कह सकते हैं कि जो डिमांड ऑफ द सर्विसेज हैं वो भी चेंज हुई है?
Actually, though really the examination pattern has drastically changed, but the demand hasn't come down. Now the exam is really difficult. Those days of 80s or even 70s and 80s, the aspirants now taking the exam in 2010 onwards, it's extremely difficult. But then many people, most interesting thing is people from various fields are entering the civil service, and people having some work experience, sometimes even 5 to 6 years, they are taking the civil service exam. And women with children, after marriage, having 1 or 2 children, they are taking the exam. So that way, the demand has not gone down. That's perhaps this is one service which gives you, number one, that a relatively that kind of security. And second thing is that kind of a respect in the society. why many people who work for 3 to 5 years in the private sector, sometimes even 7 years in the private sector, choosing civil services, because after some time they get bored. They feel that they are doing the same thing again and again, repeating themselves. Such people are coming to services, and many people with varied backgrounds and with high degrees also now taking this exam. The demand hasn't come down. Actually, it is now going up.
So, since we are talking about the demand, so for the future of civil service aspirants, how to understand the demand of the examination?
See, now the world is changing very fast. Technology is dominating, and the current crop, they should remember, they should have that kind of an aptitude for learning things. Many people stop reading and writing once they get into service. But now, the, the aspirants now should develop the habit of knowing what is happening around and getting familiar with the new technology, understanding the developments in this technology. Otherwise, for them, it's difficult to work because, after all, technology is changing very fast, and situations and also social aspirations are changing. So, naturally, if you have to balance these two things, meeting the aspirations of the people, and then similarly, keeping pace with the technological developments, one should have that kind of an aptitude to learn continuously. And similarly, to accept others' views instead of thinking that you are right, other person's wrong. Instead, it is always better to accept the other person also has a valid view. So, if you have that kind of an approach, the examination, that's why I think they have that CSAT. That CSAT examination, some people find it difficult, but then one should try to get used to it, and one should accept that yes, the knowledge or even familiarity with this technical subjects and all that, it is important. Another thing is current crop of people. Most of them, they are finding IAS jobs in the cities, but many people are not preferring to go to the rural areas. They should also have that in mind. Once I get into service, I should see my country in various stages. And wherever I work, let me meet the people there. Let me have a kind of first-hand experience of the problems of the people. So if you have that kind of orientation, you will enjoy the job. And similarly, you will enrich yourself. And at the end of the service, you feel that, yes, I could do my bit.
सर आगे चलते हैं और बात करते हैं इंटरव्यू की। इंटरव्यू एक बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट स्टेज होता है स्क्रीनिंग के लिए। क्या यूपीएससी बोर्ड देखती है, क्या क्वालिटीज देखती है कैंडिडेट में?
First and foremost thing is your confidence. It's self-confidence. It's not arrogance. You should feel comfortable with yourself. Yes, interview is a tough thing. It's difficult. But you should accept that it has a difficult problem. Yet, you should assure yourself, yes, I can face it. So the self-confidence is the first one. Second thing is to be frank enough to admit if you don't know something. Instead of trying to answer as if you should know everything. You need not know everything. So it's always better to frankly admit or even give your opinion saying that I may be wrong. What they say is your frankness. Then problem solving. Because after all, civil service examination is not just an examination. It is an entry into public life, public service. Whether you have that kind of attitude to deal with public problems, or you want to see this as a kind of an opportunity for your personal development. All the time thinking about how best you can get out of this service and all that can be sensed. So these are the three things basically new aspirants should always remember while facing the interview. Because preparing for the interview subject-wise, it's okay. But then what is your attitude? What is your aptitude? And how you conduct yourself when you are facing a problem. Because after all, you are there to solve the problems. You are not there to run away, or you are not there to blame somebody else, or you are not there to deny. You are there to face it head on. So interview is the first experience to face it head on. So that's what I.
So, how candidates can represent themselves to the best of their ability in front of the interview board?
I think more or less because basically you may be good at your subject, but it is your personality which is looked into when you are interacting. Whether you are a person who has the kind of an aptitude or the attitude to admit if you're wrong, or you have the ability to solve a problem by paying total attention, or you jump at some conclusions, or you have some biased opinions. So one shouldn't have this kind of biased opinions and then jumping to conclusions and even trying to answer everything as if you are expected to know everything.
So, if I can ask you, like, do you remember some anecdote from your interview experience?
Almost forgotten, because after all, this is nearly 35, 37 years back. Almost. Of course, in the first round, my experience was really bad because though I was assuring myself, but somehow back of my mind, there was that kind of fear. What happens? But in the second round, when I got into IPS, then I got that kind of a confidence. In the second round, I realized that yes, it is difficult, but still, let me admit wherever I do not know something. I didn't answer many questions, but still in the second round, I got through. So my experience was not that great. That way, my wife's experience in interview is really great. She got something like 210 out of 300. 300 or 250. Those days, 250. So she got 210. I think some people have the gift of the gap. They're able to express themselves freely, and they can narrate things relatively better. So that way, my interview experience was really that good, that great, but still, it's okay.
That's absolutely wonderful. You had this sense of fulfillment being called as people's officer at the end of the day. So that is all it says.
So I think that's what an officer should aim for. And in that sense, I tried my best. And that's why I am enjoying my retirement also. I wish all the new aspirants to think about, because after all, our society is and an equal society, whether we can do something to make our society equal, where opportunities are accessible to all the people.
Sir, something that you would like to say to the young India, the future aspirants?
First and foremost thing is every officer, either in the civil service or any service, focusing on quality education, how to make as many children as possible to access quality education. What this country needs is the quality education. That quality education should be given to each and every child. And each and every Indian should now compete with the global level institutions. We should aim at the world, not within your state or your district or at the national level. You should be the best. And second thing is, you have various viewpoints. One should have that magnanimity to accept. Yes, they could be different opinion. That different opinion is also well. Instead of saying that I am right and you are wrong, this makes our society a place to a difficult place to live. So youngsters should not have these kind of biased opinions, or they should not have that kind of a megalomania. Once you get into service, you think that you are on top of the world and you are the one who has achieved something great. No, that is actually the beginning. And your real life and real contribution lies in whether you are a gentleman. You should be a good officer and a gentleman. And as a gentleman, you should be able to make people feel that you are accessible. And you love to listen to people. Many people don't listen. First of all, you should listen to other person. And in our country, most of the people's problems can be solved if officers listen to them. But many people don't listen. And on top of it, they offer the advice. And half of our problems in our country is because of the solutions given by our officers previously. The so-called solutions of yesterday are the problems today. So let's not part of the problem. It is better we become the part of the solution. So all the youngsters now should focus on health and education. Whenever they get an opportunity to work in these departments, they should work with total dedication and love for the job instead of thinking there are some other coveted posts, prize posts, and that this. Instead, it is better to have exposure to this health and education so that our country should become healthy and qualitatively educated. And second thing, our aim should be the global world. We should think at global level, act at the local level. And third thing is accept the other person's viewpoint as that is also a valid viewpoint so that we can live and let live instead of having kind of parochial or kind of insisting on your views. Instead, you should accept others' views also. These are the three important things. Not only for civil servants, for all the youth, we need these things.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us in this interview session. जो भी तीन बातें आपने कही वो बहुत ही वैल्यूएबल हैं और सभी को ये ध्यान में रखना है कि हमें पार्ट ऑफ सॉल्यूशन होना है, ना कि पार्ट ऑफ प्रॉब्लम. Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your experiences and how we have to develop thought process as you. Thank you so much once again, and we wish you good health.
Thank you very much. Wish you all the best. All the new aspirants, they should succeed. Thank you very much.